This video is the second in a two-part series that I'm doing covering the practical aspects of freelance illustration, including finding work, using contracts, and getting paid. We've already covered ways of finding work in the previous video, so if you missed it, I'll go ahead and link it down below. And also my same little disclosure from the previous video, I am definitely using notes today because this stuff is very complicated and I could easily just babble on about it for way too long. So I'm keeping myself on track with some notes, and that is why you may occasionally see me looking down in addition to, looking at my socks. I don't know. Okay, so today we're going to go over the basics of contracts and invoicing, which I know is so excited, you're just jumping out of your chair because you can't wait to talk about contracts and invoicing. That's definitely how I feel about it. So before we get started, let me begin with another disclaimer. I'm an artist. I'm not a legal professional. I have not gone to law school, did not pass the bar. Everything that I'm about to go over is just from personal experience, from my own research and learning, and it should not be considered legal advice. Okay. So you've exchanged a few emails with a prospective client and it looks like you're interested, looks like you're ready to take the next step and start working on the job. Before you start any project, the number one thing you should always do is to use a contract or some other form of clear, specific written communication. Lots of us, myself included, are guilty of skipping this step at times. Maybe you're super excited or you just want to get that client in the door and get started on the job. Maybe you're afraid, I know this is definitely part of what was behind it for me, afraid of sounding demanding or not wanting to frighten the client off. Maybe you're just not sure what to do. That could happen too. But regardless, you should always, always, always have a basic agreement with the client that covers your expectations of the work that you're prepared to do and what the client is going to pay. So some questions that you will want to be sure to cover are: how many illustrations are you doing? What size are they? What's the subject? What's the level of detail? How will the client be using the illustration? How long can they use it for? Who owns the copyright? Are they allowed to sublicense it to someone else? How much will this cost? When will the client pay you? Will you require a deposit? Hint, hint, yes, I definitely recommend that you should require a deposit. When will the project start? When will the drafts be delivered? When will the client need to send in their feedback to keep you on schedule? And when will the finals need to be delivered? Client responsibilities. This is a section that I have sometimes forgotten and it turns out to be really important after the fact, but what does the client need to give you before the project starts? So they need to give you a signed contract? Yes. They need to give you a deposit? Hopefully, yes. Do they need to give you reference photos or a creative brief describing the project and how they expect it to be completed? And finally, how will the client receive the work? Is it going to be digital? So are you going to send them a PSD file, a JPEG, a PDF, or is it going to actually be the physical work? If it's for a private commission, that's usually what it is. Someone's purchasing a painting or a drawing from you. So you want to go over all of those specifics in your agreement. How many revisions are you going to allow? So how many times will you allow the client to request changes to the piece before you start increasing the price? And then if you do have additional changes, if the client has additional changes, how much is that going to cost? How much will the price increase per change? You want to be as specific about that kind of stuff as possible because you don't want the client to be surprised if they ask for, if you allow 2 changes but they ask for 5 rounds of changes, then of course that's going to cost more. And it might seem common sense to you, but you still have to say it because it might not be common sense to the client and the client might be expecting something else. So, and the last thing I want to mention is to include a contingency upon payment clause. So basically you just want to be sure to say that the client will have no rights to use that work unless they have paid you in full. So that's an important thing to include because it will motivate the client to get you payment. So depending on the client, you may also be asked to sign their contract, which is fine, that's normal, in addition to your own. So if they do ask you to do that, be sure to read it carefully and do not hesitate to ask questions, or if you see something that you're not comfortable with, to bring it up and ask for it to be changed. And if it's a particularly large job, like if it's something that you would be working on for a couple of months, or it has a big scope, you might want to consider seeking actual legal counsel. Personally, that's not something that I've done yet, but I haven't had any of those like really long-term jobs. There was one I almost did last year that would have been like a 6-month job for hundreds of illustrations. And in that case, I would have definitely gone to a lawyer, just because you want to make sure before you sign something like that that you're in a good position. So anyway, I know all this can seem tedious and boring at times, but it is so important. It's for both your protection and the client's satisfaction. There is nothing worse than being in a situation where you feel pressured and put upon to do more work than you signed up for, while the client simultaneously feels like they're being squeezed or they're not getting what they paid for in terms of their budget and their money. So the best way to avoid that kind of awful situation, which I feel like we all end up in at least once, it's a learning experience, but the best way to avoid that is to be upfront, clear, and direct in what your expectations are and what the client's expectations are. Once a project is completed, you will need to invoice the client. Ideally, you would have already gotten a deposit, and your contract will have already included how much you're going to be paid. So what is the full price for the project? And you would have gotten like a 25 or a 50% deposit up front that's non-refundable. So the invoice is for the remainder of the balance. Sending the final invoice covers what is left. So say if a project costs if a full project budget was $500, you would have gotten a $250 deposit. Then you're going to need to invoice the client for that remaining $250. Be sure that your invoice includes the amount due. So how much does the client still owe? The due date, which is generally 30 to 45 days after you send the invoice. The amount that the client has paid already. So like I said, if it was a $500 total, you want to indicate, yes, the client already paid $250 in their deposit and they still owe $250. And description of what the client is paying for. This is especially important if it's for like a large design agency or someplace that has a lot of projects going on. You want to just make a little note. It was describing the project that it was for and what you produce. So you might say like holiday food article, 6 spot illustrations, something like that. And then of course you want to have directions on how the client can pay you. So if you're expecting a check or you only take checks, you have to include your name and your address, and you have to indicate payment accepted by check. If it's for an international client, which a number of mine are, sometimes using online payment like a direct transfer or PayPal is easier. Whatever you're going to do, you need to indicate what your expectations are for how the client can pay you and just be really clear about it. And then lastly, include an invoice number. I just use a formula of the current year plus the number of the invoice. So like my 35th invoice for 2015 was 201535. And that's good to do just because it helps with organization and with sending follow-up emails so that you're not the person saying, hey, remember that invoice I sent you on that one day? You can actually refer to the invoice number. It just makes it a little bit more clear and more professional. And a note on all of this on invoicing, don't be surprised if a client doesn't pay you right away or even if they go past their due date. This is most often, at least in my experience, not because the client is malicious or trying to cheat you, but it's just because they've got a lot of other stuff going on. And again, if it's for a larger design agency or a magazine or something that has lots of deadlines and they're juggling lots of things, it can be easy to get lost in the shuffle. So if the client hasn't paid you by the due date, don't be afraid to send a reminder email. And again, just be courteous and polite, but refer to the invoice, the date that you sent it, and just remind them that you haven't received payment yet. And that's always worked out for me. To this day, I have not had anybody not pay me, which I think is like pretty great, and I feel very lucky. So that is it for contracts and invoicing. I hope you guys found it helpful. I know it can be kind of like an overwhelming, boring subject, but hopefully there was some good stuff in here. If you did find this helpful, please hit that thumbs up and the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.